In this video, I'll talk about the thought process that I use to decide how I choose a wood finish for my projects, and I'll show you how I apply them. I've also put some links down in the description box below this video to some of my favourite finishes if you want to check them out. I'm going to talk about two different finishing scenarios in this video, and the first scenario is for projects where I want maximum durability, a hard wearing finish that protects wood from things like moisture and heat. A good example for that would be a tabletop, because that's something that's going to take quite a bit of wear and tear. Maybe you'll throw your keys down on it when you get home, put a drink on it when you can't find a coaster, or maybe put a hot plate down on it from time to time. The very first thing that I want to consider is, am I happy with the natural colour of the wood? If not, then the first thing I'll want to do is apply a stain or a dye. I'll put some information on screen now showing the differences between stains and dyes, and also the differences between water-based and oil-based stains. Stains and dyes are available in a variety of different colours and can be applied using a paintbrush or a lint-free cloth, and it's a good idea to wipe away any excess with another cloth. Some woods, like pine for example, don't stain very evenly, as the stain can soak in more in some areas than others, so for those situations it's best to apply a coat of sanding sealer before applying the stain. Stains and dyes can be recoated if you want to achieve a darker colour. You can also thin it if you want to make the colour change more subtle. Water can be used to thin water-based stains, and white spirit, also known as mineral spirits, can be used to thin oil-based stains. The next thing I want to consider is whether I want to apply an oil to the wood. Oil pops the grain of the wood, bringing out the natural beauty, and it also adds a warmer amber colour tone to the wood. And whether I decide to apply oil at this stage depends on a number of things, such as, am I going to be applying a different type of finish to the wood that will bring out the grain of the wood anyway? If so, then applying oil might serve no purpose. When I later apply a different finish over the oil, is that finish going to be compatible with oiled wood? Some finishes won't bond properly to oiled wood, and I'll talk a bit more about compatibility later in the video. And do I want to add an amber colour tone to the wood? For example, I'm personally not a big fan of oil on woods like beech, because it can make it look a bit orangey, whereas I love the colour of oil on woods like sapele and mahogany. The best way to decide the answers to all of these questions is to do some tests on a scrap piece of the same wood if you have some available. Experiment and see what you like before applying it to the project. In terms of the oils that are available to buy, my go-to oil is boiled linseed oil because it's inexpensive and it dries pretty quickly. There are many other types of oil available like tung oil, teak oil and mineral oil. There are also some oils that contain varnish to offer more protection and durability, like Danish oil. While all these oils have different strengths and weaknesses, as you can see from the information I've put on screen now, they all look very similar when applied to wood. I wouldn't be able to tell one from another if I was just looking at different oils on a piece of wood. They all look pretty much the same. Oils can be recoated, and they're really easy to apply using a paintbrush, a foam brush or a lint-free cloth. If you do use a piece of cloth to apply an oil finish, it's really important to dispose of the piece of cloth safely, because oily rags can actually spontaneously combust and cause a fire. Once it's soaked into the wood, wipe away any excess oil with another cloth. You can also sand in between coats with some high grit abrasive paper to keep the finish super smooth. I tend to use 320 or 400 grit. The next thing I want to decide is what type of finish I want to use to make the wood more durable. My favourite finish for durability is usually spray varnish or spray lacquer. They both perform similarly, but I'll put some information on screen now showing the differences between the two. It leaves a great smooth finish with no paintbrush marks to worry about. It's also quicker to apply than using a brush or wipe on finish, so it speeds up my finishing workflow a lot, and it's very durable. But there are some disadvantages too. It's not usually the cheapest option when you compare it to other types of finish. The spray fumes are harmful, so you should wear a suitable respirator while using it. And it takes some practice and a bit of skill to get a good finish with it. If you apply it outdoors, then the wind can create problems. If you apply it indoors, then those harmful paint fumes hang around in the air for longer. Spray cans aren't always the most reliable thing to use either. Sometimes they can spit and splatter the finish out unevenly, which can totally ruin the finish, meaning you have to sand it back and recoat it, which can be a real pain. There are better spraying setups for applying finishes like spray varnish and lacquer, like using an air compressor and spray gun. You can also get electric and battery operated spray guns, but I've not had any experience with those more advanced setups yet. It's definitely something that I'd like to do in future though. To apply the spray varnish or lacquer, I shake the can up really well and make sure to start and end each spraying motion either side of the surface I'm spraying. What I mean by that is instead of spraying from here to here, I spray from here to here. It's best to keep the spray can upright and parallel to the surface that you're spraying for the best results. And that also minimises the risk of the can spitting and splattering. I keep the can around 25 to 30 centimetres away from the surface I'm spraying to get the most even finish. If you get any closer, you'll get some streakiness of the sheen in the finish. I apply a first coat and then wait for that to dry. Then I spray on a bit of water and wet sand between each coat with a high grit wet and dry paper like 320 or 400 grit to denib the finish, which keeps it really smooth. Then I wipe away the dust with a damp cloth, dry it off, and I'm ready to recoat. I apply multiple thin coats. The more coats that you apply, the more luster the finish will have and the more hard wearing it will be. Other alternative finishes for great durability are polyurethane. This is also available to buy as water-based or oil-based. It can be applied with a paintbrush, a roller, or a foam brush in the direction of the grain. You can also get wipe-on polyurethane, which you can apply with a lint-free cloth so that you don't need to worry about drips or brush marks. You can also thin down the normal stuff so that it's better for wiping on using white spirit, aka mineral spirits, for oil-based polyurethanes, or water for water-based polyurethane. If you do thin it down though, bear in mind that you'll want to apply more coats to get maximum durability. Again, sanding with 320 or 400 grit in between each coat helps to denib the finish and keep it nice and smooth. Varnish is another durable finish, but it dries slower and isn't as durable as polyurethane. It is usually cheaper than polyurethane though, and it offers better UV protection. I mentioned compatibility of finishes earlier. If oil or stain has been applied to the wood before you apply a finish like polyurethane, varnish or lacquer, you do need to make sure that the finish that you're using is compatible with whatever has been applied before. For example, a water-based finish may not bond properly to an oil-based finish. If you've applied oil to the wood or you've used an oil-based stain, then make sure to use an oil-based finish. If you've used a water-based stain, then it's better to apply a water-based finish. Having said all of that though, the water-based acrylic spray varnish that I use all of the time has always worked perfectly well for me over oiled wood. I do always make sure that the oil has fully dried before applying the varnish, and I've never had any issues with it even after several years of applying it to a finished project. But if you can, as I mentioned earlier, it's definitely a good idea to do some testing on some scraps of the same wood before applying the finish to your finished project. It's not always easy to tell from the packaging whether a finish is water-based or oil-based. This one doesn't say, but a good giveaway is that it says here, wash brushes in water. So that means the finish is water soluble, so this is water-based. Also, if the finish looks white and milky, that usually means it's water-based. If it looks oily with an amber colour, then it's likely to be oil-based. One final finish that offers excellent durability is hard wax oil. It's a relatively new product and it's really expensive to buy at the moment. I expect over time the price of these will reduce. I don't have any experience with them whatsoever. I've never used them, but from what I've read, it's meant to be brilliant stuff. I'll put some information on screen now about why these are so popular, and I'll include links in the description box below to the products that I've been recommended in the past. The second scenario that I want to talk about for wood finishes is for when you want to maybe add a bit of protection and durability, but the project isn't likely to be in contact with heat or moisture. Something like maybe a wooden box or a wine rack or an item of furniture that isn't going to have drinks perched on it. My favourite finish to apply to those items is an oil wax finish. I make my own using a mixture of beeswax, oil and solvents, and I also make a food safe version which is a blend of mineral oil and beeswax, which is great for things like cutting boards. I've already made a video about how I make it, which I'll link to in the description box below if you're interested, and it's also available to buy via my Etsy page if you'd like to try it out for yourself. What I like about it is that it's just super quick and easy to apply. You can use a lint-free cloth, a paintbrush, or some 4/0 steel wool. A little of it goes a long way and it just needs one coat. After applying one coat, I immediately wipe away any excess with a clean cloth and leave it to dry. And once it's dry, I can then buff it out to a nice sheen with another cotton cloth. The oil in the mixture brings out the grain and natural beauty of the wood, and the wax makes the wood super smooth to the touch. Another option to get a similar finish is to apply oil first, and I already talked about the various oils you can use earlier in the video. Wait for the oil to dry and then apply a wax polish like the waxes available from Brywax. Brywax is available in clear, but it doesn't pop the grain, which is why I prefer to use my own homemade oil wax mixture or apply oil first. Brywax is also available in different colours, which is a great way to add colour to wood without using a stain or a dye. The one thing you'll want to consider with the coloured waxes though is that you really need to thoroughly buff out the wax once it's been applied. Otherwise the stained wax can come off on things like clothing, so I wouldn't use coloured waxes on something that is likely to be in contact with clothes, like a chair for example. You can also just apply wax without applying any oil if you want the wood to retain its natural colour and you don't want to pop the grain. And wax can be applied on top of any finish, but it's important to remember that wax should always be applied last. You could also just use oil as a finish on its own without the wax. Oils that contain varnish, such as Danish oil, work best in my opinion because they'll add a bit of sheen, but if you wanted to add sheen using another oil like boiled linseed oil for example, you could just sand it to a really high grit in between coats to get a really nice polished surface. Another finish you might want to consider is shellac, which is more of an old-fashioned finish which makes it great for things like antiques. Shellac is what is used in French polishing. It looks fantastic and it can be applied directly over the top of practically any other type of finish except for wax, as I said earlier, which should always be applied last. Shellac is available as a pre-prepared liquid which is ready to use. It's also available as flakes which then need to be dissolved in alcohol. It's easy to apply using a paintbrush, a foam brush or a lint-free cloth in the direction of the wood grain. Again, it's a good idea to sand in between coats using 320 or 400 grit abrasive paper, wipe away any dust with a damp cloth, dry it off, and then you're ready to apply the next coat. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope it was useful in some way. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already for more weekly woodworking videos, and thank you for watching.